In the dead of night, a father hears his daughter's voice pleading for help. Locked away for days, eating whatever she could find, she just wanted to get out of there alive, and he would do the impossible to save her. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. Robert Miller had always known the price of success. He learned early on that the financial market had no patience for the weak, didn't forgive hesitation, and offered no second chances to those who blinked at the wrong moment. At 42, he had built an empire from absolute scratch. He had slept on couches in shared office spaces, eaten cold ramen noodles straight from the package on nights of endless spreadsheets, and sacrificed weekends, holidays and even birthdays for a vision that few could see. Today his name was synonymous with financial intelligence, relentless strategy, and results that made the competition tremble. Business magazines splashed his face on their covers, calling him a genius, a visionary, a man who turned numbers into gold. But the truth, the one Robert carried in his chest like a cold stone, was that he didn't know the real price of success until he had lost what truly mattered. His marriage to Marianne had begun with sincere promises, with shared dreams under the starry sky of a trip to the Catskills. She was beautiful, vibrant, full of plans for the family they would build together. He, still struggling to establish his company, swore that one day he would give her and the children they would have everything they deserved. And then Isabella came, Bella as he called her, a girl with enormous eyes, brown hair that shone in the sun, and an easy laugh that could light up any room. She was the only thing that could soften Robert's armored heart, the only person before whom the ruthless businessman transformed into just a loving father. But as Isabella grew, the marriage crumbled. Marianne began to resent his absences, the trips, the meetings that stretched into the early morning. Robert tried to compensate with expensive gifts, luxury vacations, and credit cards with no limit. She wanted his presence, not presents. She wanted a husband, not a ghost provider. The arguments escalated, doors slammed more frequently, and by the time Isabella turned 5, the divorce was inevitable. The separation was cold, bureaucratic, handled by lawyers who turned years of intimacy into contractual clauses. Marianne got custody of the girl. Robert was left with alternate weekends and a guilt that followed him, like a shadow. In the 2 years that followed, something changed in Marianne. Robert noticed it when he picked up Isabella for his court-approved visits. His ex-wife, once so meticulous about her appearance, now had puffy eyes, smeared makeup, and movements that were either too slow or too agitated. The apartment, once impeccable, smelled of alcohol and cigarettes. And there was a new man in her life, a guy named Fabian, tall, muscular, with wide smiles that never reached his eyes. Robert disliked him from the first handshake. There was something wrong with that look, with the way he spoke, too loudly, laughing at jokes no one else found funny. But Marianne defended her partner with tooth and nail, and legally, Robert had no way to interfere. After all, she was the mother, she had custody, and the judge had been clear. Until there was concrete proof of danger, Isabella would remain with Marianne. Isabella's visits began to worry Robert more acutely. The girl, once so talkative, now answered in monosyllables. She avoided talking about home, about her mother, about what she did during the week. When he asked if everything was okay, she would just nod, but her eyes told a different story. Robert tried to talk to Marianne, who exploded with accusations. He had no right to question anything. He wasn't present. He knew nothing. Fabian, always in the background of these tense conversations, would laugh at Robert's concern, calling him an absentee daddy trying to play the hero. Then, on a Tuesday in July, Robert did something that seemed excessive at the time, but would prove to be the only lifeline that would keep his daughter from falling into the abyss. During one of their visits, while Isabella was distracted playing in the park, he bought a prepaid cell phone. It was a simple, cheap device with a battery that lasted for days. He saved only one number in its memory, his. He hid the phone in the bottom of Isabella's backpack, wrapped in a jacket, and when the girl found it with curiosity, he knelt down, got on her eye level, and said with a seriousness she had never seen before, "Bella, this phone is our secret. Don't tell anyone. Not Mommy, not Fabian. It's only for one thing. If you really, really need Daddy, If it's a real emergency, you press this button and call me, but only if it's an emergency, okay? Promise? Isabella, having just turned 7, nodded, tucked the phone into a secret pocket in her backpack, and never mentioned it again. 3 weeks later, on a winter night that New York City rarely saw, a historic storm hit the city. It was almost midnight on a Friday when Robert was on the top floor of his office building, Miller Capital, in the heart of Park Avenue. The office windows rattled under the biting wind, and down below, the metropolis seemed to be erased under gusts of rain that felt like icy nails. He was immersed in reports for a merger that would define the next quarter, surrounded by multi-million-dollar contracts, numbers dancing on computer screens. Milton, his head of security, had already left after ensuring the building was locked down. Robert was alone, just as he always liked to be when he needed to think without interruptions. That's when he heard a ringtone he didn't recognize. It wasn't any of his 3 corporate cell phones, nor was it the office landline. It was a muffled sound coming from inside the drawer where he kept personal items. Robert frowned, opened the drawer, and found a phone he had almost forgotten, the prepaid one. His heart pounded before he even answered. He had given that number to Isabella with one clear instruction: only call in an emergency. And now, at 11:40 at night, during the worst storm of the year, the phone was ringing. Robert answered with trembling hands. He didn't hear a clear hello. He heard wind, a sharp, whistling wind, as if it were passing through an open space. He heard heavy, irregular, broken breathing. He heard teeth chattering, and then, after seconds that felt like hours, the voice came. The fragile, almost inaudible voice of Isabella. Daddy! Robert shot up from his chair with such force that it spun and hit the desk. Bella, honey, what's happening? Where are you? He tried to keep his voice calm, but panic was already rising in his throat like acid. Daddy, I'm cold. Her voice trembled as much as her teeth. So hungry, Daddy. I'm so hungry. Robert gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. It's okay, my love. It's okay. Where's Mummy? Where's your mummy? Silence. Just the wind. Then Isabella whispered, and every word was a but. Mommy? She locked me in the room. It's been 3 days, Daddy. 3 days. The floor seemed to disappear from under Robert's feet. He sat on the edge of the desk, his legs weak. What do you mean 3 days, honey? You've been locked in for 3 days. The window, it broke, I don't know when. The wind comes in, Daddy, it comes in so much, and I'm so cold, so cold. She began to cry softly, trying to muffle her sobs. I drank water from the flower vase, Daddy, and I ate. I ate Toto's dog food. Toto was the little dog Marianne had adopted months ago. Robert squeezed his eyes shut. His daughter, his Bella, was eating dog food because she was starving. That's okay, my love. That's perfectly okay. The important thing is that you called me. Daddy's coming to get you now, okay? Daddy's on his way. But then another sound emerged, a deep, male voice shouting in the distance. Shut your mouth! Didn't I tell you to be quiet? It was Fabian. Robert heard heavy footsteps, heard Isabella gasp in fear. Bella, hide the phone, hide it now, she must have obeyed, because Fabian's voice grew closer but muffled, as if the phone were inside a pocket or under a pillow. Who were you talking to, huh? Answer me. Isabella was crying, saying she wasn't talking to anyone, that she was just talking to herself. Liar! You lying, kid! And then came a sharp sound, a slap. Robert heard the impact, heard his daughter's muffled cry, and the line went dead. The silence that filled the office was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. Robert stood motionless for exactly 3 seconds, the phone still pressed to his ear, the sound of that slap echoing in his mind like a bomb. Then something inside him simply broke. He was no longer the CEO of Miller Capital. He was no longer the businessman who calculated risks and made rational decisions. He was just a father who had just heard his daughter get hit. Robert pressed the button on his smartwatch, activating the direct line to Milton. Milton, get back here. Now. It's an emergency. Isabella is in danger. Bring the armored car and meet me in the garage in 5 minutes. He grabbed the heaviest jacket he had in his office, closet, pulled on a wool hat and ran down the service stairs because he didn't have the patience to wait for the elevator. When he reached the garage, Milton was already there, car running, engine rumbling. "What happened, boss?" Robert got into the passenger seat, breathing as if he'd run a marathon. "It's Isabella. She's locked in for 3 days, at Marianne's place, with a broken window, and that bastard is hitting her." Milton gripped the steering wheel and floored the accelerator. "Then let's go get her." The rain was so heavy the windshield wipers could barely keep up. The streets of New York were flooded, transformed into turbulent rivers. Abandoned cars blocked roads, fallen trees forced detours, but Milton drove with the precision of someone who knew every corner of that city. Robert stared out the window without seeing anything. All he could see was Isabella's face, her enormous eyes, her little voice asking for help. The house was on the Upper West Side, in an upper-middle-class residential complex. Robert had paid for the property as part of the divorce settlement. It was a beautiful house with a garden, an automatic gate, and a high fence. When they arrived, the gate was closed. Robert tried the intercom. No one answered. He got out of the car, tried to force the gate. Nothing. He looked at Milton. "Ram it." Milton hesitated for only a second. "This is going to cause trouble, boss." "I don't care." And he didn't. Robert got back in the car, and Milton reversed a few feet, accelerated, and smashed the armored bumper against the gate. The metal groaned, bent, and on the third charge, the gate gave way with a crash that woke half the street. Neighbors turned on lights, opened windows. Robert didn't look at any of them. He ran to the front door of the house. Locked. He pounded on it, shouting Marianne's name. Nothing. He shouted Isabella's name. Nothing. Milton brought a crowbar from the trunk. Together, they forced the lock until the door gave way. The contrast was brutal. Outside, biting cold, horizontal rain, wet darkness. Inside, artificial heat, yellow light. The smell of alcohol mixed with cheap perfume. The living room was a mess, empty bottles on the coffee table, an overflowing ashtray. Robert ran up the stairs, following the sound of voices from the upper floor. Milton was right behind him. Isabella's room was at the end of the hall. The door was locked from the outside with a simple but effective padlock. Robert kicked the door with all his might, once, twice, 3 times, until the wood around the latch splintered and the door flew open. What he saw made him stop in the doorway as if he'd been punched in the gut. The window was shattered, glass strewn across the floor, icy wind pouring in without mercy. Isabella was curled up in a corner, wrapped in a thin blanket, her body shaking violently. Her lips were purple, her face as pale as wax, her eyes swollen from crying. And standing next to her was Marianne. His ex-wife was wearing a rumpled nightgown, her hair disheveled, her eyes glazed over in that way Robert knew all too well, the look of someone who had drunk far too much. In her hands she held a coiled belt. When she saw Robert, she staggered, but tried to assert her authority. "What are you doing here? You have no right to break into my house." Robert walked past her, as if she were a ghost, and knelt beside Isabella. The girl, upon seeing him, burst into tears, but it was a quiet, controlled cry, as if she were afraid of making noise. "Bella, my love, Daddy's here. It's all okay now." He wrapped her in his arms, and she was so cold, it was like hugging ice. Milton appeared with a thick blanket from the car, and together they bundled the girl up. Marianne started talking, fast, desperate. "She was being punished. She's stubborn, Robert. You don't know how stubborn she is. She needs to learn to obey." Robert turned to her, and Marianne took a step back. She had never seen that look on her ex-husband's face. "Punished? You locked our daughter in a room with a broken window for 3 days. She ate dog food, Marianne. Dog food?" Marianne swayed. I didn't know the window had broken. I was going to check. You weren't going to check anything. You were drunk as always." Robert's voice rose and Isabella flinched. That's when Fabian appeared in the doorway, wearing shorts and a tank top, a mocking smile on his face. "Well, look who decided to show up, Daddy Hero. A little late, aren't you, or do you only come when the kid calls crying?" Robert stood up, still holding Isabella in his arms. "Get out of the way." Fabian crossed his arms. "You're not taking her. Custody belongs to Marianne. It's in the papers. You can't take her from here without authorization." Milton positioned himself beside Robert, his posture making it clear there was no room for negotiation. "We can discuss legality later. For now, get out of the way, or I'll move you." Fabian laughed, but he stepped aside. Robert descended the stairs, holding Isabella as if she were made of glass. Marianne followed, screaming that she was going. To call the police, that he would lose everything, that he was committing kidnapping. Robert didn't stop, he didn't look back. He placed Isabella in the back seat of the car, covered with all the blankets Milton had. Milton got behind the wheel, and they drove off, leaving behind the house, the screams, and the storm that continued to fall as if the sky itself were weeping. On the way to the hospital, Isabella started to cough. It was a deep, wet cough that came from her chest. Robert felt the panic rise again. "Hang on, Bella, we're almost there." But she closed her eyes, her breathing growing weaker, more shallow. Milton called Mount Sinai Hospital, telling them they were on their way with a child in critical condition. When they pulled up to the emergency entrance, nurses were already waiting with a gurney. Robert placed Isabella in their arms, and she was swallowed by a corridor of double doors that swung shut in his face. A nurse stopped Robert before he could barge into the trauma unit. "Sir, you need to stay here. We'll take care of her." Robert stood outside that glass door, his hands pressed against the E. Cold pain watching through the window as the medical team worked on his daughter. Tubes, masks, beeping monitors, doctors speaking in codes he didn't understand. Time stood still. It could have been 10 minutes or 10 hours. Robert couldn't say. He only knew that if Isabella didn't come out of there alive, nothing else mattered. Not the company, not the money, not his reputation. Nothing. After an eternity, a doctor came out, pulling off his disposable gloves. "Mr. Miller? I'm Dr. Henry, the pediatrician on duty. Your daughter is stable for now, but her condition is serious. She has severe hypothermia, dehydration, acute malnutrition, and signs of pneumonia. We're going to keep her in intensive observation for the next 48 hours. Robert felt his legs buckle. "Is she going to be okay? Doctor, please, tell me she's going to be okay." The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to do everything in our power. She's a strong little girl. But you got here just in time. A few more hours in those conditions, and it might have been too late." Robert was allowed into the room. Isabella was in a white bed, connected to wires and tubes, but breathing, alive. He pulled up a chair, sat beside her, and held her small, cold hand. And there, in that hospital room lit by artificial lights, while the storm continued to roar outside, Robert Miller made a silent promise. He would never again let anything, absolutely anything, hurt his daughter, no matter the cost, no matter who stood in his way. From that moment on, he was no longer just a businessman. He was a father at war, and he was not going to lose. The first 3 days in the hospital were a mix of relief and terror. Isabella was out of immediate danger, but her body carried marks that the doctors could read like a horror story. Her prominent ribs revealed weeks of inadequate nutrition, not just the 3 days of confinement. Bruises on her body told stories of falls or something worse. Her nails were bitten to the quick, a sign of chronic anxiety, and her eyes, those eyes that once shone with childish curiosity, now darted fearfully at every sound of a closing door, at every shadow passing in the hall. Robert didn't leave the room. He sent Milton to get clean clothes, but didn't go home. He slept in the armchair next to the bed, waking at his daughter's every move, at every change in the monitor's beeps. The doctors told him he needed to rest, that it was no use running himself into the ground. But how could he rest? Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Isabella's voice asking for help, heard the sound of the slap, felt her cold body in his arms. No, he wasn't leaving. Not until he was absolutely sure she was safe. It was on the second day that the hospital psychologist appeared. Dr. Lucille was a woman in her 50s with grey hair tied in a bun, red-framed glasses, and a gentle way of speaking that immediately calmed those around her. She knocked lightly on the door, even though it was open, and entered with a kind smile. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Miller, right? I'm Dr. Lucille, the psychologist for the pediatric team. I came to talk with you both for a little while. Robert stood up, shook her hand. Bella's asleep. She was up all night, afraid to close her eyes. Dr. Lucille looked at the little girl in the bed, so small amidst the white sheets, and sighed. Unfortunately, that's more common than we'd like in cases of trauma. May I sit? They spoke in low voices while Isabella slept. Robert told her everything: the divorce, the change in Marianne's behavior, Fabian's presence, the signs he should have noticed sooner but ignored because he trusted the justice system, the paperwork, the process. Dr. Lucille listened without interrupting, just nodding from time to time. When he finished, she took a deep breath. Mr. Miller, what Isabella experienced wasn't just neglect. It was psychological and physical abuse. Locking a child up for days, depriving her of food and safety, exposing her to extreme cold, that causes profound damage. She will need therapy. And so will you. Robert frowned. Me? Doctor, I'm not the problem here. I know, but you just discovered that your daughter suffered horribly while you were miles away. That generates guilt, anger, a mix of emotions that can hinder her recovery if not managed well. Robert was about to reply when Isabella started to stir. She woke with a start, looking around in panic until her eyes found her father. "Daddy, are you still here?" Her voice came out hoarse, tired. Robert went to the bed, held her hand. "Of course I'm here. I'm not leaving, Bella, I promise." She looked at Dr. Lucille with suspicion. The psychologist smiled. "Hi, Isabella. My name is Lucille. I just came to chat with you for a bit. Is that okay?" Isabella looked at her father as if asking for permission. He nodded. "It's okay. Dr. Lucille is nice." The conversation started simply. Dr. Lucille asked about favorite colors, cartoons, preferred foods. Isabella answered in a low voice, but she answered. Gradually, Dr. Lucille approached the difficult subject. "Isabella, do you know why you're in the hospital?" The girl looked down at her hands. "Because I called Daddy. I shouldn't have called. Mommy is going to be so mad." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "Bella, you did the right thing by calling. You did nothing wrong." Isabella began to cry softly. "But Fabian said I'm a lying kid, that nobody would believe me. He said that if I told anyone anything, he would do bad things." Dr. Lucille exchanged a quick glance with Robert. "Isabella, Fabian isn't here, and no one here is going to let him do anything to you. You're safe. You can tell me anything you want." And Isabella told her. Between sobs and silences, she told her story. She told them that her mother started going out a lot, leaving her alone with Fabian. She said that Fabian would yell at her for anything, that he would break things when he got angry. She told them that once she spilled juice on the floor and was locked in a dark room for a whole night as punishment. She said she started to be afraid to eat because if she ate too much, it was gluttony, and if she ate too little, it was being difficult. She said she learned to be invisible, to walk without making a sound, to not ask for anything so she wouldn't be a bother. And she told them that last week, after she answered in a way Fabian considered disrespectful, he locked her in the room and said he would leave her there until she learned some respect. Her mother was asleep, drunk on the couch, and did nothing. Every word was a stab to Robert's heart. He wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to go back to that house and make Fabian pay for every second of terror he caused. But he controlled himself, because Isabella needed him whole, not shattered by rage. When she finished, Dr. Lucille placed a hand on her shoulder. "Isabella, you are a very brave girl, and everything you've told me will help us make sure you never have to go through this again. Okay?" Isabella wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Can I stay with Daddy?" Dr. Lucille smiled. "We're going to work on that." But while Isabella was slowly recovering inside the hospital outside, a different kind of storm was brewing. Marianne and Fabian didn't stay quiet. In fact, they did what desperate and unscrupulous people do. They attacked first. The day after the rescue, they held a press conference in front of the local police precinct. Marianne appeared with red eyes, makeup deliberately smeared to look like she'd been crying, dressed simply, almost humbly. Fabian stood beside her in an ill-fitting suit, a grave expression on his face, and the story they told the cameras was a masterpiece of manipulation. Marianne wept as she said that Robert, unable to accept their separation, had broken into her home in the middle of the night, assaulted her and her partner, and kidnapped their daughter. She said Isabella was under medical care for a bad flu, nothing more, and that Robert, obsessed and unstable, had fabricated an absurd story of neglect to justify the abduction. Fabian added that he had always suspected Robert was violent, that the girl would come back from visits with bruises, and that they were gathering evidence to request a review of the visitation rights. "That man is dangerous. He may have money, he may have power, but he can't have my stepdaughter, not while I can protect her." The press devoured the story. After all, it was the perfect narrative, the cold billionaire businessman versus the humble, suffering mother. The headlines started to appear. "Finance magnate accused of kidnapping his own daughter. Desperate mother pleads for justice after violent home invasion. Robert Miller, business genius or abusive father?" Social media exploded. Hashtags demanding justice for Marianne went viral in hours. Old photos of Isabella with minor scratches, normal for a playful child, were reposted as evidence of abuse. Clips of Robert from old interviews where he spoke harshly about competitors were edited to make him seem like a violent, uncontrolled person. In less than 24 hours, the reputation Robert had spent 20 years building was in tatters. Shareholders of Miller Capital started calling, concerned. Contracts were suspended. Business partners issued statements distancing themselves until the situation was resolved. The company's stock plummeted, and worst of all, the judge handling the custody case, pressured by public opinion and the apparent truth of Marianne's story, signed a preliminary order. Robert would be investigated, and Isabella was to be returned to her mother within 72 hours, unless he presented concrete evidence that the child was in real danger. When Robert's lawyer, Gregory Miles, showed up at the hospital with the notice, the businessman simply looked at the paper and said, "No." Gregory, a 60-year-old man who had seen it all in 40 years of law, sighed. "Robert, I understand your outrage, but if you don't comply with this order, you'll be arrested for contempt, and then you won't be able to protect anyone." Robert threw the paper on the table. "Gregory, I pulled my daughter out of a room where she'd been for 3 days without food, with a broken window, getting beaten by an abuser. And now, they're telling me I have to return her to that? Why? Because that woman and that scumbag know how to cry for the cameras." Gregory sat in the chair beside him. "I know, but in court, emotion doesn't win cases. Evidence wins cases, and they've built a narrative before you could. You have 72 hours to deconstruct that narrative with facts, documents, witnesses. Otherwise, you lose custody, maybe you lose your freedom, and worst of all, you lose any chance of actually protecting Isabella." Robert took a deep breath, trying to control the fury boiling inside him. "Then tell me what I need to do." Gregory opened the briefcase he was carrying. "First, we need complete medical exams. Every injury, every sign of neglect, all documented and signed by hospital doctors. Second, we need witnesses, someone who saw what was happening in that house. Third, physical evidence, the room where she was locked, the broken window, anything that can corroborate your version. And finally, we need something they don't expect, a trump card that will turn the game." Just then, Milton entered the room. He had a flash drive in his hand and an expression Robert knew well. It was the look of someone who had struck gold. "Boss, you need to see this." He connected the flash drive to the laptop Gregory had brought and opened a video file. The image was shaky, recorded on a cell phone, but clear enough. It was security footage from the house on the Upper West Side, from the external cameras Robert had installed years ago, and which apparently Marianne had never turned off. The footage showed the last few weeks. It showed Marianne leaving in the middle of the night, staggering drunk, being carried into the house by Fabian. It showed Fabian yelling at Isabella in the yard, the girl cowering, trying to protect herself. It showed the moment the window in her room was broken by a rock Fabian threw during an argument, and no one fixed it. Robert watched it all in silence. When the video ended, he looked at Milton. How did you get this? Milton gave a slight smile. I installed these cameras, remember? I have remote access. I got into the system, downloaded everything. Is it legal? Maybe not entirely. But is it the truth? It is. Gregory adjusted his glasses. This could be challenged in court. But it's a start. We need more. And that's when Robert remembered. Celia Martin. Gregory frowned. Who? Celia Martin. She was Isabella's nanny for 4 years, from the time Bella was born until shortly after the divorce. Marianne let her go, said she didn't need help anymore. But Celia adored Isabella. If anyone knows anything, it's her. Milton was already typing on his phone. Found her address. Astoria, Queens. Want me to go there? Robert shook his head. I'm going with you. But before leaving the hospital, he went into Isabella's room. The girl was awake, watching cartoons on a tablet a kind nurse had lent her. When she saw her father, she smiled. It was a small, fragile smile, but it was a smile. Daddy, where are you going? Robert sat on the edge of the bed. I have to take care of some things, Bella, but I'll be back. I promise I'll be back. She held his hand. You're not going to let me go with Mommy, are you? Please, Daddy. Her voice was low, terrified. Robert kissed her forehead. I'm going to do everything in my power to protect you. Everything. Do you trust me? Isabella nodded. I trust you. Celia Martin's house was simple, a narrow row house on a quiet street in Astoria. Robert rang the bell, and the door was opened by a short woman in her early 60s, with completely white hair in a bun, an apron tied around her waist. When she saw Robert, her eyes widened. Mr. Miller, my goodness, are you all right? Robert realized he must have looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes. Mrs. Martin, I need to talk to you. It's about Isabella. The woman's face grew serious. Isabella, what happened to my little girl? May I come in? Sitting in the small but cozy living room, Robert told her everything. With each revelation, Celia Martin brought her hands to her face, letting out exclamations of horror. By the time he finished, she was crying openly. I knew it. I knew something was wrong. After Mrs. Miller let me go, I tried calling a few times to check on Bella, but no one ever answered. Once I walked by the house, just to see if I could see the girl through the gate. And that man, Fabian, he saw me and came at me screaming, saying that if I showed up again, he'd report me for stalking. Robert leaned forward. Mrs. Martin, did you see anything when you were still working there? Anything at all that could help? The woman hesitated, wringing her hands in her lap. Then she stood up and went to an old sideboard in the corner of the room. From a drawer, she pulled out a picture frame. It was a photo of baby Isabella, laughing in Celia's arms. But when she turned the frame over, Robert saw something taped to the back. A small memory card, the kind from a camera attached with adhesive tape. In the last few months I worked there, Mrs. Miller was already different. Drinking too much, going out a lot. That man starting to show up. And I saw things. I saw him yell at Bella for leaving a toy out of place. I saw Mrs. Miller push the girl into her room and lock the door when she was upset. I saw Bella ask for food and be ignored, so I started recording. With my phone, secretly. I knew that one day someone would need to see it. Robert took the memory card as if it were the most precious object in the world. Mrs. Martin, this could save my daughter, but I need you to confirm all of this officially, perhaps in a deposition, maybe in court. Are you willing? Celia Martin wiped her tears. Mr. Miller, I raised that girl like she was my own granddaughter. If I have to face the whole world, I will. Just tell me where and when. If you were in Robert's shoes, would you have gone after the evidence yourself, or would you have waited for the justice system to act? Tell us in the comments. Back at the hospital, Robert gave the memory card to Milton, who immediately started working with a data recovery specialist. Meanwhile, Gregory prepared the medical documentation, collected statements from nurses and doctors, and built the defense. The hours slipped by like sand through his fingers, and with every minute that brought the deadline closer, the tension mounted. Robert knew he had only one shot. If he failed, Isabella would go back to that hell, and he might never get her out again. On the evening of the second day, Milton returned with a laptop and an expression of contained victory. "I recovered everything, and it's worse than we imagined." He played the videos. They were scenes filmed secretly by Celia Martin over months. They showed Fabian pushing Isabella against a wall, screaming that she was a spoiled, useless child. They showed Marianne completely drunk, laughing as Fabian locked the girl in her room, saying it was for her own good. They showed Isabella crying, begging to be let out, banging on the door, being completely ignored. And the most devastating video. It showed Fabian admitting to Marianne that he enjoyed breaking the spirit of the girl, that it was fun. To see her scared, that if she grew up weak and submissive, she'd be easier to control. Robert watched it all with clenched fists, his nails digging into his palms. Gregory beside him shook his head. "This is gold. With this, we not only secure custody, but we'll see those two in jail." But Robert knew it wasn't that simple. Marianne and Fabian had public opinion on their side. They had built a convincing narrative. Presenting the evidence in a closed courtroom wouldn't be enough. The world needed to see, the world needed to know what kind of monsters hide behind smiles for the camera. And so the riskiest, most daring, and perhaps most necessary plan Robert had ever had to execute was born. A plan that would involve not just justice, but the complete exposure of the truth in a way no one could ignore. Robert looked at Milton. "You know someone who's an expert in live streaming, right? Someone who can set up a system where I can show videos and audio in real time to a lot of people?" Milton smiled. "I do. But we're talking about something big here, boss. Something that will change the game. Completely. Are you prepared for the consequences?" Robert looked out the hospital window at the illuminated city below, at the world that judged without knowing the facts. "I have nothing left to lose, Milton. My reputation is already destroyed. My company is sinking. The only thing I have left is my daughter, and I will fight for her until the very last second, no matter what I have to do." Milton nodded. "Then let's turn this game around." The deadline was closing in. There were only 18 hours left until the court order, compelling Robert to return Isabella to Marianne, would take effect. But as the clock ticked against him, Robert wasn't idle. He was setting up a play that would change everything. Milton had called a contact, a streaming technology specialist named Bruno, who had worked on major live events and knew how to bypass blocks and ensure a broadcast reached millions without being interrupted. Bruno showed up at the office Robert had turned into a command center within the hospital itself, bringing equipment that looked like it was out of a spy movie. "So let me get this straight," Bruno said, adjusting his thick-framed glasses as he opened his laptop. "You want a live stream that can't be taken down, that hits social media and public screens around the city, and that shows video and audio in real time. Is that it?" Robert nodded. "Exactly, and it needs to be tomorrow night." Bruno whistled. "Tight, but doable. I'll need access to some urban advertising systems, which is technically hacking, but I imagine at this point you're not too concerned with technicalities." Robert gave a humorless smile. "Concerned with technicalities? Bruno, I rammed the gate of my ex-wife's house with an armored car. Technicalities are the least of my problems. Right now." While Bruno handled the technical side, Gregory took care of the legal part. He had filed an emergency motion asking for a stay on the child return order, arguing new facts and new evidence. The judge, pressured from all sides, agreed to hold an extraordinary hearing in 48 hours. It was enough time. Robert just needed to ensure that when he walked into that courtroom, it wasn't just words against words, but the undeniable truth displayed for all to see. But before the court there was another stage. A stage Robert would set himself. Fabian had made contact. Through a private number, he sent an audio message to Robert's phone, arrogance dripping from every word. "So, Daddy-O, think you're going to win this one? Let me give you a reality check. You're not. Marianne has custody. The judge is on her side. The press loves her. You've become the villain of the story, but I'm a reasonable guy, so I'll make you an offer. You transfer $2 million to an account I'll provide, and we forget this whole thing. Marianne drops the suit. You keep the brat. Everyone's happy. Think about it, Robert. $2 million is nothing to you. But for me, it's enough to start a new life far away from here. You have until tomorrow to decide. After that, the offer expires, and we go after you with everything we've got. Cheers." Robert listened to the message 3 times. Each time, anger gave way to calculation. This wasn't just blackmail, it was a confession. It was arrogance. It was an opportunity. He called Gregory. They took the bait. The lawyer was silent for a few seconds. "You weren't planning any bait, Robert. What's going on?" Robert explained. Gregory took a deep breath. "This is risky. If it goes wrong, you'll look even worse. And if it goes right, it finishes them. I'm willing to take that risk." Robert replied to Fabian's message with a short text. "I accept, but I want to talk in person. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the Parkview Grill on the Upper East Side. Just you and Marianne. I'll bring the first part of the money, we'll sort out the details, and we'll close the deal. No lawyers, no witnesses, just the three of us." The reply came quickly. "Deal. But don't try anything, Robert. If you show up with cops or a wire, the deal's off and we'll bury you." Robert smiled. "Don't worry, I have a lot to lose too." But of course it was a lie. Robert had everything to gain. The Parkview Grill was a luxury establishment frequented by New York's elite, with a panoramic view of the illuminated city. Robert chose that location for a specific reason. Just 2 blocks away was one of the largest digital billboards in Manhattan, installed on the facade of a commercial building. That's where Bruno would work his magic. The afternoon before the meeting, Bruno and Milton went up to the building, with equipment disguised in delivery backpacks, accessed the billboard's control system through a security loophole Bruno knew, and installed a transmitter that would allow them, at the right moment, to replace the ads with a live broadcast. Simultaneously, Bruno set up fake accounts on all social media platforms, ready to blast the same stream as soon as Robert gave the signal. On the night of the meeting, Robert dressed in an impeccable navy blue suit, white shirt, and a silver silk tie. He looked like the businessman he always was, confident, in control. But there was one detail no one would see clipped to his tie. Invisible to the naked eye was a micro camera the size of a pinhead, connected via Bluetooth to a device in his inner jacket pocket. Everything the camera captured would be transmitted in real time to Bruno's system. Milton was positioned in a car on the street, monitoring everything. Bruno was in a friend's apartment with access to all the systems. And Gregory was at his office, preparing the documents for the next day's court hearing, in case the plan failed. Robert arrived at the restaurant at 7:45. He requested a discreet corner table, but with good lighting. He ordered water, declined the menu. He waited. At 8:10, Marianne and Fabian arrived. She looked different. Heavy makeup, a tight dress, high heels, a glamorous version of herself that contrasted sharply with the tearful, simple woman from the interviews. Fabian, beside her, wore a cheap suit, but walked with his chest puffed out as if he owned the place. They sat across from Robert. No greetings, just appraising looks. Fabian got straight to the point. "Did you bring the money?" Robert pulled a thick envelope from his pocket. "First installment. 500,000 in cash. I'll transfer the rest as soon as we sign a paper dropping the lawsuit." Marianne took the envelope, opened it, ran her fingers over the bills. A smile played at the corner of her lips. "I always knew you were smart, Robert. Always knew that when it came down to it, you'd choose the easy way out." Robert forced a smile. "Yeah, Marianne. I've learned that sometimes it's better to pay for peace. But before we close this, I want to make sure we're on the same page. You take the money, you get out of Isabella's life, and you never show up again, correct?" Fabian leaned back in his chair, picked up the glass of whiskey he had ordered, and took a long sip. "Look, Robert, I'll be honest with you. Marianne here never really wanted to be a mother. Isabella was more of an accident than a choice, right, honey?" Marianne shrugged. "It's true I thought it would be different, that I'd feel that connection, you know. But I didn't. The girl is a burden. She's work, she complains. She always wants attention. If it weren't for the child support you pay, I would have sent her to a boarding school. Or to your mother ages ago." Robert tightened his fingers around his water glass. "So you're telling me you kept custody of her just for the money?" Fabian laughed. "Obviously. You think we'd put up with that crybaby for what? Maternal love? Please. But then you decided to play the hero, broke into the house, took the girl. We needed to turn the tables, and the best way to do that was to make you the villain. It was pretty easy. A little crying here, a photo there, and boom, public opinion on our side. Marianne added, her voice slurring, slightly from having had drinks before she arrived. And it worked. You became the monster. We became the victims. It was fun, actually, watching you, the all-powerful Robert Miller, flailing around like a fish out of water. Robert took a deep breath. It was working. They were exposing themselves, saying everything he needed to hear. But he needed more. He needed them to confess what really mattered. And the room? Locking Isabella up like that? Letting her be cold, hungry? Was that part of her education? Fabian leaned forward, his eyes shining with a malice he didn't even try to hide. That girl needed to learn some respect. A spoiled kid, used to having everything. I just taught her that the world doesn't revolve around her. Locking her in the room, making her skip dinner, that stuff works. She stopped talking back, stopped complaining, got real quiet just the way I wanted. Robert felt bile rise in his throat. You hit her. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Fabian shrugged. A few spankings here and there, nothing major. A kid who doesn't get hit turns into a delinquent. I was doing her a favor. But you, with your overprotective nonsense, you don't get that. Marianne laughed, a loud, unpleasant sound. Robert, you're pathetic. You always were. Thinking money solves everything, that you can just buy your little girl back. But the truth is you were never there. I was. And if I chose to let Fabian educate her his way, that's my business, not yours. It was enough. Robert discreetly touched the small button hidden on the side of his tie, activating the broadcast. In the car, Milton saw the tablet screen light up. In the apartment, Bruno saw the signal come through. In seconds, the video and audio from that table at the Parkview Grill were being streamed live. The giant billboard, which seconds before had been showing a car ad, flickered, changed, and suddenly displayed the scene from the restaurant. Pedestrians on the street stopped, looking up. What the hell is that? Someone asked. Others took out their phones and started filming. On social media, the accounts Bruno had prepared began blasting the link to the stream. Live, the truth about the Isabella Miller case. In a few minutes, hundreds of people were watching. In 10 minutes, thousands. In 15, tens of thousands. The broadcast spread like wildfire. WhatsApp groups, Instagram stories, tweets, Facebook posts all flooded with that video. And what people were seeing and hearing was devastating. They were seeing Marianne admit she never wanted her daughter, that the girl was a burden. They were hearing Fabian confess that he locked up, hit and humiliated Isabella. They were watching, in real time, the confession of two monsters who had manipulated public opinion. In the restaurant, Robert kept the conversation going, keeping them talking. And if I hadn't come to get Isabella that night, what would have happened? Fabian took another sip of whiskey. She probably would have stayed in there for a few more days, until she learned her lesson, or until we got tired of it and opened the door. Whatever. Marianne laughed again. You know what's funny, Robert? You think you saved her, but we were going to let her out eventually. We were just teaching her. You're the one who overreacted, as always. Robert felt a cold calm wash over him. You're monsters. You know that, right? Fabian raised his glass as if in a toast. Monsters who are about to be $2 million richer, so it's worth it. But then Marianne noticed something strange. People in the restaurant were staring at them, not discreet glances, stares of shock, of horror. Some people were holding up their phones, pointed at their table. A waiter hurried past, whispering to the manager. The manager looked at Robert's table with an expression that mixed fear and anger. Marianne frowned. Robert, what's going on? Robert leaned back in his chair, his smile finally genuine. What's happening, Marianne, is that the entire city just heard everything you've said for the last 15 minutes. The color drained from Fabian's face. What are you talking about? Robert took his phone out of his pocket, opened a social media app and showed it to them. The screen displayed their own table, live, with thousands of comments scrolling by. Arrest these monsters! How could you do that to a child? What a disgusting couple! Marianne grabbed the phone, her eyes wide with panic. You were recording? Recording and broadcasting. Live. To everyone. And hey, there's even a giant screen right there on Park Avenue showing you confessing to everything." Robert pointed towards the window. From where they sat, they couldn't see the billboard, but they could see the glow of its light reflecting off the buildings, could see the movement of people stopping to watch. Fabian shot up abruptly, his chair falling backward. "You son of a—" But before he could finish, 2 police officers entered the restaurant. Behind them was a public prosecutor whom Gregory had contacted. She had been alerted by Bruno as soon as the broadcast began and had been watching along with half the city. "Fabian Costa and Marianne Miller, you are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, child abuse, and filing a false report." The prosecutor recited their rights as the officers handcuffed them. Marianne was crying, but these were no longer the calculated tears of the interviews. These were tears of real panic. "Robert, for the love of God, turn it off. Turn it off." Robert just watched. "I can't turn it off, Marianne. I'm not the one broadcasting anymore. It's thousands of people sharing it. The truth is finally out, and there's no putting it back." They were led away under the flashes of cell phone cameras from the other restaurant patrons. Robert was left alone at the table, the envelope of fake money still there. It was prop money, obviously. He never intended to pay them anything. It was just the bait to make them talk, and it had worked better than he could have dreamed. He left the restaurant and found Milton waiting in the car. "Boss, the internet exploded. Everyone is sharing it. The hashtags against you are gone. Now it's all about them. You did it." Robert just nodded. "Not yet. This was just the beginning. Tomorrow, we have court." The extraordinary hearing took place the next day, in a courtroom packed with reporters, lawyers, social workers, and curious onlookers. The judge, Judge Frank Sampson, a man in his 60s with a reputation for being fair but tough, entered the room and called for silence. Gregory represented Robert. Marianne and Fabian had public defenders, as no private lawyer would touch the case after the public expose. The room was tense, the air thick with expectation. The judge began. "We are here to decide on the custody of the minor Isabella Miller, but before we address the matter of custody, we must deal with the criminal accusations that have arisen. Mr. Miles, do you have the evidence you mentioned in your motion?" Gregory stood up, connected a flash drive to the room's projection system. The first thing he showed was Isabella's complete medical report: hypothermia, malnutrition, bruises, signs of severe psychological trauma. Then he played excerpts from the videos Celia Martin had recorded, showing the abuse. Next, he played the audio of Isabella's call for help. And finally, he showed clips from the live broadcast of the previous night, where Marianne and Fabian confessed to everything. With each piece of evidence, the silence in the room grew heavier. Some people were crying. Others just shook their heads in disbelief. When Gregory finished, the judge looked at Marianne and Fabian with an expression of profound disgust. "Do either of you have anything to say in your defense?" Marianne's lawyer tried to argue that she was under the influence of alcohol, that she had been manipulated by Fabian, that she deserved a second chance. Fabian's lawyer tried to claim he was merely disciplining the child, that his methods were questionable but not criminal. The judge listened in silence, then brought down his gavel. "I have seen and heard enough. Marianne Miller, you are hereby stripped of your parental rights over Isabella. Full and permanent custody is granted to Robert Miller. Furthermore, you and Mr. Fabian Costa will face criminal charges for all crimes committed against the minor. You are forbidden from approaching the child within 500 yards. This hearing is adjourned." Robert felt his legs weaken with relief. He had won. Isabella was safe. Outside the courthouse, reporters wanted interviews, wanted statements. Robert simply said, "I just want to take my daughter home." And that's exactly what he did. 3 days after the hearing, Robert signed the papers that made his resignation as CEO of Miller Capital official. The news caused an uproar in the financial market, with headlines questioning if the businessman was emotionally unstable, if he was making a mistake. But Robert didn't care. For the first time in 20 years, he was making a decision that had nothing to do with profits, stocks, or growth. It had to do with what really mattered: his daughter. He appointed Milton as transitional director, left clear instructions for the team, sold a large portion of his shares, and simply walked away. He didn't look back. Isabella was discharged from the hospital a week after the trial. She was still fragile physically and emotionally, but the doctors said that with care, love and time, she would make a full recovery. Dr. Lucille gave Robert specific instructions: a stable environment, a predictable routine, regular therapy, and above all, patience. Isabella will have setbacks, she explained. She'll have bad nights, nightmares, moments of irrational fear. That's normal after the trauma she's lived through. Don't try to rush the healing. Just be present. Robert promised he would be, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. And that's why on the day he took Isabella from the hospital, he first stopped at the house in Astoria. Celia Martin opened the door, and upon seeing Isabella there, her eyes filled with tears. The girl, seeing her old nanny, ran and threw herself into her arms. "Grandma Celia, I missed you so much." Celia hugged the girl as if she were the most precious thing in the world, stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort. Robert watched the scene and knew he had made the right choice. "Mrs. Martin, I know it's a lot to ask, but I need help. I'm taking Bella to a new place, far from New York, where we can start over. And I would very much like for you to come with us, not as an employee, as family." Celia looked at him, surprised. "Mr. Miller, Please," Robert interrupted. "Isabella needs you, and so do I." The woman wiped her tears, looked at Isabella, who was still clinging to her, and smiled. "When do we leave?" Robert smiled back. "Tomorrow." The house was in Montauk, on the eastern end of Long Island, about a 4-hour drive from the city. Robert had bought it years ago as an investment, but had never used it. It was a simple wooden construction: 2 bedrooms, a large living room, an integrated kitchen, and a glassed-in porch facing the ocean. Nothing luxurious, nothing ostentatious, just a place of peace. It had a small garden in the back, a low fence, a little white gate that was never locked, and the constant sound of waves breaking on the sand. It was the complete opposite of the cold, luxurious apartment where Isabella had lived with her mother, and of the glass-walled office high above Park Avenue where Robert had spent so many years. When they arrived, it was late afternoon. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Isabella got out of the car slowly, looking around with wide eyes. She had never seen the real ocean, only in pictures. "Daddy, is this real?" Robert took her hand. "It's real, Bella, and it's ours. Our new home." Celia was already taking the bags from the trunk, but stopped when she saw the girl's expression. It was a mixture of wonder and fear. Wonder at the beauty of the place, fear that it could be taken from her at any moment. The first few days were about adjusting. Robert and Celia worked together to make the house cozy. They bought simple but comfortable furniture, hung light curtains that let the sunlight in, and filled the kitchen with real food. Not ready-made meals from expensive restaurants, but rice, beans, chicken, vegetables, things Celia knew how to cook, that filled the house with smells that reminded them of home. Isabella's room was decorated with care, walls painted a pale yellow, a bed with floral sheets, shelves with books and a few new toys. But the most important part was the lighting. Robert installed small LED lights around the ceiling, creating a starry sky effect. He left a lamp on the nightstand, which would always stay on during the night. And he installed a dimmer switch, so Isabella could control the intensity of the light, never having to be in complete darkness. But even with all the care, the nights were difficult. Isabella would wake up screaming, saying she was locked in, that no one was coming for her. Robert would run to her room, turn on all the lights, pick the girl up, and repeat, always the same words. "You are safe. No one will ever lock you in. Daddy is here. I will always be here." Sometimes she would calm, down in minutes. Other times it took hours. Robert never showed impatience. He never sighed with exhaustion. He just stayed there, holding his daughter, letting her know she wasn't alone. Celia was fundamental in this process. She had infinite patience and an ability to turn difficult moments into healing opportunities. When Isabella refused to eat for fear there wouldn't be more later, Celia didn't force her. She simply said, "That's okay, my love. When you get hungry, the food will be here. There will always be food." and she kept a small plate always available in the refrigerator so Isabella could get it whenever she wanted. Slowly the girl began to understand that this was true, that she didn't need to hide bread under her pillow, that she didn't need to eat in secret, that the food wasn't going to disappear. One day, about 3 weeks after they moved, something happened that deeply marked Robert. They were on the beach, the three of them, building sand castles. Isabella was focused, using a yellow bucket to mold the towers. Suddenly, a larger wave came and washed away part of the castle. Robert braced for a meltdown, for tears, for fear, but Isabella just looked at the wave, then at the ruined castle, and started to rebuild. "It's okay, Daddy, we'll just make it again." It was a simple moment, but to Robert, it meant the world. It meant she was starting to understand that not everything that breaks stays broken forever, that you can rebuild, that you can start over. Robert was rebuilding himself too. He, who had spent his entire life obsessed with work, with targets, with numbers, was now learning to simply be present. He was learning to make breakfast slowly, without looking at the clock. He was learning to sit on the porch and just listen to the ocean, without thinking about mergers or acquisitions. He was learning to play with his daughter, really play, not the rushed weekend games, but long, inventive games with no end time. And he discovered that this wasn't a waste of time. It was exactly where he should have always invested his time, in his own life, in his own family. Isabella's therapy took place twice a week with a child psychologist in Montauk, Dr. Paula, a young, kind woman who used art and play to help Isabella process the trauma. She would ask Isabella to draw her feelings, and in the beginning the drawings were dark, full of closed doors and large, menacing figures. But over time, the drawings began to change. The sun appeared. The ocean appeared. 3 figures holding hands appeared: Isabella, Robert, and Celia. A dog appeared because Robert had adopted a stray from the beach, a little brown and white puppy that Isabella named Sunny, because he was warm and always happy. 3 months after the move, Robert decided it was time to do something special. Isabella's 8th birthday was approaching, and he wanted it to be a real celebration, not just of her age, but of their new beginning. He organized a simple party in the garden of the house. He invited a few neighbors, children from the new school where Isabella had started, Dr. Paula, and of course Milton, who had become an honorary uncle and visited whenever he could. Celia made a homemade chocolate cake, decorated with yellow buttercream flowers. Robert set up a makeshift barbecue with the help of a neighbor, and Isabella, for the first time in as long as he could remember, laughed out loud, played with other children without that frightened look of someone expecting punishment at any moment. In the middle of the party, as the sun began to set, Robert asked for everyone's attention. He had something to give Isabella. He brought out a small, delicate, blue velvet box. Isabella opened it carefully, and inside was a necklace. It was a thin silver chain, and hanging from it was a key, a small golden key, crafted with intricate details. Isabella looked at her father, confused. "It's a key, Daddy. But what does it open?" Robert knelt down to her level, held the girl's hands. "This key doesn't open any specific door, Bella. This key is a symbol. It means you will never be locked up again. You will never be a prisoner of anything or anyone. This key is your freedom. It's a promise that from now on, you choose where you want to be, what you want to do, how you want to live. And I will be here to make sure you always have that choice." Isabella looked at the necklace, then at her father, and tears began to stream down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. She threw her arms around Robert's neck and whispered in his ear, "Thank you for not giving up on me, Daddy." Robert held his daughter tight, feeling his own heart fill with a happiness he didn't know was possible. "I will never give up on you, Bella. Never." The following months were a time of growth for both of them. Isabella began to excel in school, making friends, participating in activities, discovering she was good at drawing and telling stories. Robert, in turn, began to explore a side of himself he had buried long ago. He had always enjoyed carpentry, working with his hands, but never had the time. Now he set up a small workshop in the back of the house and began making furniture, wooden toys for Isabella, gifts for Celia. It was a therapeutic activity that helped him process everything that had happened and, at the same time, connected him to something tangible, real, different from the abstract numbers he had dealt with his entire life. Celia also flourished in that environment. She, who had spent her life caring for others, was now also being cared for. Robert insisted that she rest, take days off, enjoy the beach, and slowly she allowed herself to do so. She was learning that she could be happy too, that she could have moments just for herself, without guilt. The dynamic between the three of them became that of a true family. Dinners at the table, conversations about their day, shared laughter, plans for the weekend. It was simple, but it was complete. 1 year after the move to Montauk, Robert and Isabella were sitting on the sand, watching the sunset. Sunny, the dog, was chasing seagulls, barking joyfully. Isabella held the necklace with the key, something she always did, when she was thoughtful. "Daddy, do you have any regrets?" Robert looked at her. "About what, Bella?" "About leaving the company, about losing all of that to be here with me." Robert smiled, took his daughter's hand. "Isabella, I didn't lose anything. I gained everything. Before I had money, success, respect, but I didn't have a life. I didn't have you, not really. Now I do. And there is nothing in the world worth more than that." Isabella rested her head on her father's shoulder. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Bella, more than you can ever imagine." They sat there in silence, just watching the colors of the sky change, listening to the sound of the waves, and for the first time in a long time, Robert felt that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, not at the top of a skyscraper, not in boardrooms, not closing multi-million-dollar deals, but right there on the sand, with his daughter by his side, building a life worth living. The ghosts of the past still appeared from time to time. Isabella still had occasional nightmares, still avoided closed doors when possible, still had days when anxiety returned, without warning. But now she had tools to deal with it. She had a present father, a grandmother of the heart who loved her unconditionally, a therapist who helped her process it all, and above all, she had a home that was truly safe. A place where the lights never went completely out, where the doors were never locked from the outside, where love was not conditional or threatening. As for Marianne and Fabian, they faced the consequences of their actions. Marianne was convicted of neglect and abuse, in addition to permanently losing all rights to Isabella. Fabian received a heavier sentence for assault and extortion. Robert felt no pleasure in this. He felt no satisfying revenge. He just felt that justice, even if delayed, had been served. And more importantly, he felt that Isabella was protected, that those people could never hurt her again. Milton visited every month, bringing news of the company which was recovering under new management. He always insisted that Robert come back, at least in a consulting role. But Robert always refused with a smile. "That chapter of my life is over, Milton. I have a new one now, and this new one is so much better." Milton understood. In fact, he was even a little envious. Seeing Robert's transformation, seeing the genuine happiness on his face, made Milton question his own priorities. And on one of his visits, he confessed, "Boss, you've inspired me. I'm thinking of retiring, spending more time with my family too. Life's too short to be lived in offices." And so the years went by. Isabella grew up, became a creative, intelligent teenager with dreams of her own. She never forgot what she went through, but she didn't let it define her. She used her story to help other children, started volunteering at shelters, and drew and painted pictures that she sold to raise funds for child protection agencies. Robert watched her with a pride that couldn't be contained. The little girl he had rescued from a cold, dark room had become a light for others. She had become exactly what her name meant, Isabella, the bringer of light. One evening, when Isabella was 15, she and Robert were on the porch, as they often were. She was studying for a test, and he was reading a book, something he had started doing more of after leaving the corporate world. Isabella closed her notebook and looked at her father. "Dad, you know I never properly thanked you, right?" Robert looked up from his book. "Thank me for what?" "For saving me. for risking everything, for choosing to stay. Robert put his book aside, looked at his daughter seriously. Bella, I didn't save you because I'm a hero. I saved you because I'm your father, and there was no other option. You are a part of me. And if I had to do it all over again, I would make the same decisions without hesitation. Isabella smiled, a smile that was now free, without fear, without weight. Still, thank you for everything. Robert stood up, went to his daughter and kissed the top of her head. You don't need to thank me. Just keep being the incredible person you are. That's all I ever wanted. And so this story ends, not with a perfect fairy tale ending, because real life isn't like that, but with a true ending, where love wins, where courage is rewarded, where redemption is possible. Robert Miller, the businessman who had everything and nothing at the same time, discovered that true success isn't measured in numbers or contracts, but in hugs and laughter, in shared dinners and late-night talks, in being the safe harbor for someone you love more than life itself. And Isabella, the girl who lived the nightmare of being locked away, forgotten and hurt, learned that not every closed door stays closed forever, that there is light after the darkness, and that there are people willing to cross storms to rescue us. To this day, she wears that golden key around her neck. Not because she needs it to open doors, but because it reminds her every single day that she is free. Free to be whoever she wants. Free to love and be loved. Free to live without fear. And every time the sun sets in Montauk, painting the sky with those impossible colors, Robert and Isabella sit on the porch, side by side, and just exist. Without rush, without pressure, without fear of tomorrow, because they have built together a home where there is always light, always love, and always the hope that, no matter how dark the night was, the sun will always rise the next day. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert and Isabella has touched your hearts. If you are moved, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. We'll see you in the next episode.